Okay, so welcome back. A very good morning to all of my dearest viewers. In this session, I am going to discuss case control study. So let's start. So we start the case control study with a simple definition. What is this case control study? In simply, we can say that it is analytical observational study. Okay, so what is the meaning of this analytical observational study? So first we try to understand what is the meaning of this analysis or analytical study. So when we are going to a study by dividing the participants into two groups, when we are going to a study by dividing the participants into two groups, such types of a study is called analytical study. So what is the meaning of this observational study? In observational study, we basically observe the progression of disease in patient without any interference or involvement by themselves. So in one sentence, what I am telling to you, what is the meaning of this analytical observational study? In this study, researcher first divide the participants into two groups and then they observe the progression of disease without interference by themselves. So when researchers are going for these types of a study, we call them it is a analytical observational study, and this case control study is also a types of analytical observational study. So now we are going to discuss what is the meaning of this two terms. One is the case and the control. So case means disease, control means participants are free of disease. So here researcher what are doing? Researcher collect the participants. They divide the participants into two groups. In one group they kept those participants who having a disease, and in another group they kept those participants who are disease free, and then they are go for disease. So when researchers are going by dividing the participants into two groups, in one groups they kept disease free patients called as control, and in another group they kept disease patient called case, and such types of a study is called case control study. So whatever I explained, that things written on boards. Analytical means researcher first divide the participants into two groups, then they go for comparative study. Now, first they divide the participants into the two groups and then they compare the progression of the disease without intervention by themselves. There is no involvement of researcher by themselves. Okay, so they divide the participants into the two categories. One categories they kept the disease people called case, and the another categories they kept the disease free participants called control, and asked about the exposure. One important point, after dividing the participants into two groups, I mean one case and control, they ask about the exposure. In exposure means contact history, risk factor, like that. We understand it with the help of example. Wait for some minutes. Okay, so control in what I'm telling to you, they ask about exposure like risk factor and contact history in both groups, and on the basis of this exposure history, they calculates the odds ratio. Okay, this is the another most important points. After dividing the participants into the two groups, we ask about the exposure history, and on the basis of this exposure history we try to calculate this odds ratio. So what is the meaning of this odds ratio? On the basis of this odds ratio, we try to correlate the strength of exposure with disease, means how this exposure is closely associated with this disease or not. So how exposure are strongly related to the disease or not. Okay, so now we are going to take an examples for the better understanding. Or so first we are going to clean my pot. Then I explain you how we correlate the odds ratio. With the help of odds ratio, we find the correlation of exposure and disease. Okay, जल्दी से मीटर जा. Okay, let's find. For example, let's suppose we take 100 participants. We take 100 participants. 100 participants who is corona positive. Corona positives. Okay. In group A. Okay. Another groups. This group A, since they having a disease, so we call it as case. Another group, we take 100 more participants who is corona negatives. This is called group B or control. Okay. When we are going to asking the exposure history in both groups, this 100 participants who is corona positives, when I am going to ask about the contact history in 100, there are 19 people say yes, I am come in contact with any infected people. So in 100, what they told, 19 say positive contact history. Positive say contact history, and 10 say yeah, no, I am not any come in contact with any infected person. So 10 gives negative contact history. 10 gives negative contact history. Okay. While in corona negative person, in 100 participants, 19 gives negative contact history. That is absence of any contact history. And the 10 people say yes, I having a contact history. So 10 give positive contact history. Okay, so on the basis of this data, first we are going to formulate our tables of case and control. So in the top of the table we write case, and one side we write control. Okay. In vertically, one side we write expose. Expose means positive contact history. Another bottom we write non-expose. Non-expose means negative contact history. So what are the data given we put in these tables? So in case there are 100 participants na corona positives. So in the 100 participants of the corona positives, what say 19 say having a history of contact. So we write it as 90. 90 they having a exposed, matlab positive history of contacts. And in disease, there 10 also said that no, I have no any history of contact. While in the other hands, in case of 100 participants who is corona negative, we called it as control. In 100, 10 people say yes, I having a history of contacts, and the 19 say just chill, yeah, I have no any history of the contacts. So we write it as A, this is B, this is C, and this is D. Okay, so what is the formula of odds ratio? The formula of odds ratio is exposure of case upon exposure of control. Yeah, we can also write that odds of case upon exposure. Yeah, odd of case upon odds of case upon odd of control. So when we in simple term, what I am saying, to expose odds of case means events occur. Yeah, we can simply write that expose upon non-expose, expose upon non-expose. ये किस केस में? केस के केस में. Simply in other hand we also write expose अपॉन नॉन एक्सपोज किस केस में, कंट्रोल के केस में. So in case these are the table of case, how many of them giving a positive history means they having a exposure 90, so we write it as 90. Okay, then non-exposed means they are the non-exposed people but still they having a corona positive, so we kept under the case categories. So 19 by 10, this is a case, votes of case. Now in case of control, how many of them giving a positive contact history? 10. They are positive contact history 10, so we write 10 it here. And how many gives negative history of the contacts? 90. Okay, so when we are calculating this value, 90 into 90 upon 100, this value will come at 81. So what this 81 indicate? This 81 indicate that the strength of disease in exposed population are 81 times more than the people who is non-exposed. In simple term, when we observe this table, we find that we go for the cross multiplication. 90 into 19 into 10 into 100. So if you having a clear cut idea about this table, you can simply go for the cross multiplication and calculate the value. So overall, the meaning of this what case control study, with the help of this case control study, we try to find the odds ratio, and with the help of odds ratio, we analyze that how many times the exposure, in case of exposure, the disease is common. I mean, how the exposure related with disease. Like in this case, you can see that in case of the exposure, there is 81%, sorry, not percentage, 81 times higher of the developments of disease as compared to the non-exposed condition. So these are all about the case control study. In next video, we are going to discuss the cohort study. So let's find. Okay, thank you.